I am right. And now I would like to start live streaming on Facebook. Just a moment, so that we don't have the double voice. Yes, here we go. I will have to mute the live stream in a moment, so that one doesn't disturb the other. Okay, so I'm trying to keep silent. Disturb the other. Okay, right. So we are live streaming already. Great. Everybody, welcome to the webinar in our so-called summer series of IATEFL Poland webinars. We are doing it for the first time in the history of our webinars. So this is really a privilege that we can all participate in these webinars. I would like to start by saying a few words about Sinead, who is the head of languages, culture, and communication department at Ensta Paris. And I would like to say that this is Sinead's most recent achievement. So I would like to thank you, Sinead, that you, in spite of all those positive changes that are happening in your professional life and career, you all the time, you are willing to do some voluntary work for associations like ours. I appreciate it, we all appreciate it, as I'm sure all the participants of today's webinar appreciate it as well. A few words about Sinead. She is an English teacher, but also at the same time, she is an experienced academic manager and teacher. And as she wrote in her bio, she combines the passion for language and the passion for literature. She's been doing what she's doing for 20 years. And what is really impressive is that Sinead teaches all kinds of levels. Yes, so primary, secondary, university, and last but not least, business students in France. And she has also, so this is a very interesting mix, but there is also a very interesting mix in the type of schools and the type of activities that Sinead has been undertaking in her professional life. Like, she has worked in state French schools, but she has also been a freelance tutor for international companies. And also she has set up her own association for teaching English to children. And also she has been senior teacher at the British Council in Paris, Cambridge Delta tutor, TESOL France Ex-Com, and active IATEFL member. And being an active IATEFL member, she also cooperates with IATEFL Poland. And as far as professional interests are concerned, Sinead likes curriculum development, materials design, and related matters. And I would like to stress this piece of information because that I'm going to talk about in a moment, namely, Sinead has recently collaborated with Bethany Cagnol, although I have to say that, frankly speaking, Bethany Cagnol is of the opinion that she has always been inspired by and supported by Sinead, who has given her a lot of interesting professional insights and guidance. But recently, the project that they've been working on together is MOOC course, Promote Your Scientific Results. I will put the information about this course in the chat box so that the course is available on Coursera, and to a large extent, there are many free resources. And Bethany, in her webinar that she conducted a week ago, stressed this feature, yes, that she insisted on many of the related resources to be free for the usage of us teachers, scientists, whoever needs these the skill of promoting yourself and scientific results that you have achieved. Okay, last but not least, there is also life outside the classroom. And while being outside the classroom, Sinead enjoys traveling, reading, learning new languages. So you are a very active person, and I really appreciate the fact that you conduct these webinars for IATEFL Poland. I would like to remind the participants today that there is another webinar by Sinead, and I'm also going to put this message in the chat box, that she conducted on the 19th of January 22, Making Mediation Meaningful. Yes, and the recording of this webinar is available on our YouTube channel. I will also provide you with the useful links to YouTube channel, Facebook account, and so on. Yes, so if you are interested in topics related to mediation and making it meaningful, the recording of the webinar is available. Tonight, Sinead is going to inspire us with her expertise concerning assessment. Assessment, a big thing for all of us teachers and a difficult thing. So over to you, Sinead.
Okay, thank you for that lovely glowing introduction. And I can say that Bethany Cagnolo also inspired me. So it's a mutual appreciation society, I would say. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here this evening. Maybe before I start sharing my slides, I'd like to ask you in the chat to tell me how you're feeling today. Yeah, so how are you? Put it in the chat. How are you on this 12th of July? How are you doing today? Okay, so Daniela is excited. That's cool. Like, great. Already inspired. Wow. we haven't even started yet. Yeah, that's nice. That's good. Okay, yeah. Do we have any other adjectives as to describe how you're feeling at the beginning of the webinar? Curious. Okay. So what we'll do is that maybe at the end hopefully we'll have a few minutes where we'll come back to these adjectives that you put at the beginning, and we'll take the temperature as to how you're feeling at the end of the webinar. Okay. So let's begin. I'm going to start by showing my slides. And as you already know, the title of the webinar is actually kind of playing on like I assess, you assess, but we assess. Okay. And the title is deliberately provocative in the sense that I talk about self-assessment with students. What I'd like to do before we get into the kind of the nitty-gritty of the subject is to ask you to participate. I'm going to stop sharing these slides, and I'm going to share another screen where you have access to it's actually a WooClap event. And I'd like you to answer to connect to the screen, basically. You're going to, sorry, I'm making a mistake. Here we are. Yep. On this slide, you have a link to the WooClap, so you can participate by either scanning directly the QR code, or going on to wooclap.com and entering the event code. And what I'd like you to do when you get there is to answer the question that you see. So I'm going to stop sharing my current screen, and I'm going to share what I see then on the WooClap that you have participated, that you've already participated in. So let me see. Right. Okay. So what's interesting is that we have a very clear percentage here. Yeah, we have 2 people who have answered the WooClap, and we see that 100% of participants believe that actually the teacher and the student or students should be responsible for assessment. I'd like to move on to the second question then. Can you confirm that it's okay for you that you can access the second question about the skills and the types of knowledge that we need to assess, just to be sure? Is it okay for everyone? Ah, okay, so Daniela, she left accidentally. Okay, yeah. All right, yeah. And for the others, is it, yeah, can you just confirm that it's all right that you can access the second question? Yep.
Gosia needs to see the code again.
Yep. Okay. All right. So what I can do is I'm going to put I can put the code in the chat maybe. Yeah. Okay. That way it'll be easier. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So we have some answers. I see that we have some answers already. So the question is, yeah, what skills or what types of knowledge? So we have obviously the kind of like the skills that we test in class, right? So we have like the listening, reading, and speaking skills. We also need to be talented or skillful in terms of the different types of assessment that we can offer or that we can suggest to our students. Yeah. I think that it's another really good answer here. Yeah, is the fact that you know, we have to be, there's a whole variety, right? It's not just one skill, but teachers already, we are already very talented people because we have we're very we have a variety of skills, a very varied skill set, and so this is something that when we assess as teachers, that we offer the students. And I also really like the final comment, which is that we need to be clear about what we want our students to do, or what we have to know what we want them to be able to do better, right? That's important when we assess. Okay. And the types of knowledge, yes, to be checked as opposed to a syllabus, right? Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of the reason I asked this question is that sometimes when I speak to colleagues about sharing assessment with students, one comment I hear is that, but yeah, I mean, you know, our students, they don't actually know, they don't have the same knowledge as I do, okay, or they don't have my skills in terms of assessment, and so there's almost like a fear of letting go, or of sharing the assessment, because as teachers we want to do the best by our students, so that was why I'm asking these questions. Yeah, I'm seeing number 2, learning results or outcomes. Yes, absolutely. And this is something that I'm going to show you some concrete examples of what I've done where I've really focused on outcomes. I agree also, excellent, yeah, so the different categories of knowledge, right? So it's not only, when we assess, it's not only, you know, about English, right? It's also, we also teach sometimes like real life skills, right? Or other skills which will be useful beyond and outside of the classroom. And I think that we can trust our students to know how to do that, okay? And to participate in that. Okay, wonderful. And I just have like one more question, which is again connected to the assessment. So I'm going to like move on to the next one. And this is for you. So this is an open question. How do you think we could, okay, I'm sure that you all teach at different levels. Maybe some of you teach younger students, others it's business classes, others adults. What would you suggest practically to make assessment easier if we want to share it with our students? Concretely, what do we need to put in place? What measures do we need to put in place to make that possible, basically? This is the final WooClap question. Oh, I thought Daniela has been removed again. Okay, yeah, nice, right. Checklists, yes. Yeah, that's an excellent idea, right? And what I really like about this idea is the fact that before they begin, right, that we actually go through the checklists or the tables to ensure that students know what is expected of them before they get going. Okay, right, yeah, nice. Okay. Any other suggestions here? Yep, nice. Absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting comment because sometimes we tend to think about assessment, especially as end of a grade at the end, right? Or validating or not validating. And obviously assessment can be formative, it can be summative at the end. I agree completely with the author of this comment who said that, multiple types of activities actually can be used to assess in the classroom. Yeah, completely. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the WooClap, and I'm going to share my slides this time. I want to thank you for your active participation in the on the WooClap. I thought that maybe we would start like that, make it a little bit interactive, because I don't know if it's very hot in Poland, but in Paris it's very hot today, and so I thought we need something to to cool us down or get us started. So. Well done for that. So what am I going to actually talk about today then? Well, maybe I should begin by telling you what this webinar is not, rather than what it is. So this webinar is not telling you what you should do or what you shouldn't do. It is a very real sharing of experience. I'm going to show you 2 different examples of self-assessment that I have implemented in 2 different classes with my students. And I will tell you very honestly what worked and what didn't work. Then I'll tell you where I am right now in terms of how could I improve what I did, and how could I do things differently. And I'll conclude with some future iterations. How will I implement this differently in the future? And we will also have some time for questions and answers at the end for you to share what your practice and what you've done, because I'm sure that you also have lots of wonderful ideas to share with us. So, right, let's move on to the next slide then. So maybe I should begin by giving you some context. In the introduction of my bio, it's true that I've taught in lots of different schools and at lots of different levels to different age groups. But more recently, I've been working in graduate engineering schools in France. So these are my students, are master's level students. They come to school 2 years after they arrive with a bachelor's level, and then they spend 3 years at the school, and when they leave they have a master's in science and engineering degree. So the reason that I started thinking about integrating my students and working with my students on self-assessment is because in the school where I worked just before changing jobs in January, we actually, all of the language courses, the grades were based on 50% assessment, continuous assessment over the semester. So tasks that the students completed, the work that they did. But we also had 50% for each class, which was based on attendance, participation, and engagement. And as a teacher, I really struggled with this 50-50, 50% on the tasks that they completed, fine, no problem. That was, I had no difficulty. But I really felt that the 50% on participation and engagement, I found that was quite subjective. And I had difficulty every class, every year. I struggled with giving a grade. And so what I wanted to do was think about, okay, how can I be more objective in this 50%, which to me feels quite subjective? How can I also involve my students in this process? And beyond that, in France, we have an official body which regulates an engineering diploma. And so the question was, how can I implement what this body is asking us to do, which is they want our students to develop real life skills. in the classroom. So that was kind of my starting point. And one of the real life skills that the body is asking us to develop is the ability to self-assess. Okay, so bear that in mind as we go along. Okay, and so basically, what I wanted to do then. I have a problem with my slides. Yeah, okay. So how does it, I've given you the overall context. Now I'm going to explain, we're going to imagine that you are my students, okay? And I'm going to explain how we're going to work together on the assessment, okay? So basically, in the WOOC lab at the beginning, people talked about, one person made a comment that we can use like a table, okay? Or I chose to work on a grid, okay? And so what I do before going to the final class of the semester, I fill in the grid before class. And when I arrive in the classroom, I give students the blank grid, okay? So they have like the same grid, but with nothing, only the rubrics on the grid. And I ask them to self-assess their attendance or participation, their engagement. I'm going to show an example just after. And I tell them that they're going to self-assess. They're going to tell me what grade they give themselves, and we're going to compare, okay? So basically, let's imagine that I ask, Daniela to do this. Daniela, she fills it in, and then I discuss with Daniela, and she says, well, yeah, I gave myself a 3 here, and I'll say, well, actually, I gave you a 4, and so we have a discussion on the concretely on the grid. In my experience, the students usually self-assess, they're harder on themselves than I am. Okay, so often there's usually like sometimes I have 1 point, maybe my assessment is 1 point higher than what the student gives himself or herself. But it's usually the student who gives a lower assessment than I do, right? So we discuss why that is, and if the opposite happens, in the sense that a student, over assesses, or if there's a major gap in one of the rubrics, then I tell the students that in the discussion, they need to justify, or they have to kind of, give me valid arguments as to why they believe that they deserve the extra, like this higher grade. So we talk about assessment. We get them to reflect on their own assessment, and we also do all of this in English. I probably should have mentioned at the beginning that this is something that I've done with students who have a B2 level and upwards. Okay. So what I'd like you to do before I show you my grid is I'd like you to think, based on what I told you, how it works. Can you identify already any like advantages or disadvantages to this system? And if you could, like, yeah, just put them in the chat. I'd be interested to know. Okay. So Daniela, you've given us an advantage, right? The fact that the students, they may feel like they feel involved, and that they're kind of part of that it's a process. And I really like this word process, because in fact, often we think of assessment as a product, right? So like a test, an end of semester test, or like a certification. It's in English, it's a test. But in fact, as someone mentioned before, in the WOOC lab, assessment, it's not just on a day. It can be ongoing. So it's a process. Yeah. Yes, so the creativity and critical thinking, absolutely. These are the 21st century skills that we're trying as teachers all over the world, that we're trying to instill and to foster in our students. The disadvantage is that, yes, some people may need more guidance while they assess themselves. Absolutely. And that's why it's very important to consider learner training, right? You know, it's not possible to kind of go in and say, so hello, everyone, you know, today we're changing everything. You're going to start assessing yourselves. It's, you know, it's fun. It's free for everyone. And we have to train them to do that. Absolutely. And it's more, yeah, it's more formative, right? Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I agree completely with all of your ideas here. And so maybe I'm going to show you now. Okay, I'll show you the example, right? And then we'll talk about the advantages and the disadvantages. So this first example was used in this was for an elective course. So the students, they chose to study my course on accents. And so this is what I gave the students when they arrived in class. I had filled out my part, okay? So I filled in my grid. So just I should mention that a 5 is the highest score, right? And 1 is the lowest score. And so I asked the students to do their part and to fill out you know, what they felt would be a valid and a fair assessment of their work, right? And so here you can see that there's actually a mix. So this is my first attempt, right? Because as teachers, we learn too. I mean, and this is a mix of both, I want to say like facts. So for example, attendance and punctuality, these are facts. I know in my group, I know if a student has always been present, you know, over the 12 weeks. I note if a student regularly arrives late. So that was factual. The second part also, like the regularity in terms of the tasks, it's also factual, because I know that when I gave specific deadlines to respect, if a student didn't do one of the set tasks over the semester, I had that information. So like the first 2 were quite factual and objective. And then the bottom 2, so the quality of work and engagement, these are more subjective, right? And so the issue that I had with my first grade is that I felt that I was playing on adverbs. What I mean is, for example, in quality of work, to get a 5, the quality in the tasks had to be consistently high. Whereas for a 4, you had to fully meet expectations, right? Or a 3, it was generally meets expectations. So this is something that is also reflected. I don't know if in the audience this evening, if we have any IELTS examiners, but in IELTS grids, right, for speaking, for example, or for writing, often there's also a play on adverbs. So that was kind of like my inspiration. And these, I did have some questions from students saying, so, you know, what do you mean by, like, you know, by fully meets expectations, or, you know, what is consistently high? And so this was something that we talked about, so that they knew exactly what I was looking for, or how I had assessed them. And the bottom one then on the engagement, I think that like to get a number 1, right, to get a score 1, like, you know, hello, were you actually in this class? That one is pretty self-explanatory. And to be honest, I'm really lucky because my students are great, and I didn't have anyone who got a 1. But it was important to, you know, to define for the students, you know, what's the difference between a 5 and a 4, okay? So to get a 5, it's that, you know, amazing student who is always, be it face-to-face, online, they're always, you know, me, volunteering and participating. But the issue that I had with my engagement is that I mentioned voluntary oral participation in class, but at the same time, like, some students are naturally shy, and so maybe they don't, you know, participate orally a lot in class, but it doesn't mean that they're not engaged, right? So my first example was kind of, yeah, it was a first attempt, but it wasn't perfect. So then I'd like to show you so my next slide, if I can go, is to give you my honest feedback then on version 1. So this reiterates what you said before, okay? So what was nice about this first version was that the students were actively involved, and there was kind of, it was a bit like a game. It was kind of, you know, challenge, your teacher challenges you to, you know, to see if you're going to give yourself the same grade or not. So it was kind of fun. I mean, if you find assessment fun, right? There was the idea that they were developing self-assessment skills, so they were actually having to appraise their own work and their own commitment to the course, not just you know, for one class, but over an entire semester. And what was also good about the first version was that the rubrics are flexible. So you could adapt, it's completely adaptable according to your specific needs. So for my class, this was on accents. I chose those 4 rubrics, but for another class, it could be useful to modify the rubrics and to have others instead. And the same with what I liked about the first version was that I could share it with my colleagues, because I have amazing colleagues who share with me, and so I always like to give back. When something works, it's kind of nice to say, well, yeah, try this because it worked well for me. I would say that the disadvantages, which you have on the right, the key disadvantage is that it's very time consuming. So arriving in the classroom, having filled in, you know, the grid for every student, it takes time. And it also means that you really need to know your students very well. And so I'm very lucky because we have small groups. For example, the version 1 I showed you, I had a group of like 18 students, which meant that I basically had to, you know, fill in the grid for 18 students. Obviously, if you have a group of 60 students, that would be, it could be quite long. I think that there's also a certain factor of risk in the sense that when I did it the first time, I thought, oh, I wonder, you know, is there going to be a discrepancy? Like, will the students all over assess? Will they all under assess? Am I actually fair in how I'm assessing their like their participation or their commitment? So that was kind of that risk was there. And I think that there was also a risk in terms of student expectations. So I'm going to share a comment that one of the students made when I gave out the grid. This was back in December. And so I explained you know, how we would be working and what we would be doing. And he said, oh, you know, that's kind of weird. Like, he was like really perplexed as to why a teacher would actually ask students to take part or to self-assess, because for him, culturally, that's the teacher's job, right? So we had to kind of like discuss how it could be interesting or useful in their future careers or in their professional life. When you have an appraisal interview with your boss, it's important to kind of go in and say, well, yeah, I know that this I do well, maybe this I didn't do so well. So we talked about that. And then I mentioned that when I showed you the grid already, in my first version, there was also a mix of objective and subjective rubrics. So that was kind of, it wasn't perfect, right? So what I decided to do then was to try again. And I'm not saying that example 2 is perfect, because I don't think that nothing is ever perfect. We can always do better. But this time, this was for a different class. And what I did was, instead of focusing on the like subjective and objective, I focused essentially on like skills. Okay. And I took them from the CEFR because this was a class on international business. And so we were inspired by the mediation levels from the CEFR. And so I decided to work on that in this class. Some of the skills I wanted needed to be at like a C1 mediation level, like for example, the third one on the screen, which is about the professional language, right, during the simulation. But others, they were fine at a B2 mediation level, or the final one, it was like a B2 plus, right? And so this grid was used. Students worked in a group. They did like it was a simulation activity where they arrived. They had 20 minutes to discuss an issue, and then I asked them to, before giving them like kind of my feedback, I asked them to fill in their own feedback on their group's performance, right, within on that task. And so this was, this one was more based on skills, so less like more objective in the sense that I did not invent I chose which of the mediation skills I wanted to assess. But at least there wasn't the idea of playing with, adverbs with like, can generally outline or always outline. This was much more neutral, I would say, in the way that it was presented. And I would say that in terms of how it was received by students, it worked well. They were quite receptive to this. I think this worked better also because it was more on their skills, and there wasn't the subjectivity of did I go the extra mile, for example, in what I did. It was more factual, perhaps, or more based on behavior. And language, rather than their commitments or their participation. So in terms of the future perspectives, because I told you at the beginning that I would like to, it's still not perfect, and I want to make it better. And so if you remember back to the start of the webinar, I mentioned that in the title, it was involving students, sharing self-assessment with students. And so I think that what I've done has always been, I've always been the person who decides, right? I was the one who chose the rubrics, both in example 1 and in example 2. My expertise as teacher was to say, well, yes, I've identified these 4 rubrics in example 1 that I want the students to self-assess at. And in example 2, I've identified these skills as key skills in my course. And I didn't give the students the choice. So one potential way to forward could be to consider how I could involve the students in actually co-constructing the rubric together, right? So that they're not only involved in the assessment at the end, when it's kind of, it's time for the grade, so fill in your self-assessment, but that this is also an activity that we do as part of the class, and we could do it even at the beginning of a semester, for example, where we agree together, we negotiate, we discuss, and we talk about what expectations will be, and they would be fully involved in that process. Another perspective that I've thought about is also moving perhaps from, instead of having students self-assess, so having the students assess themselves, perhaps another way to do it would be that I could actually have students peer assess, okay? So that instead of having Daniela assess Daniela, that Daniela would assess Anthony, okay? And that could also give rise to a discussion, and we could, the teacher could also have an input in that exchange. Again, this is something that I think we need to negotiate, we need to discuss with the students, because they also have to be comfortable being graded not only by the teacher or being assessed by the teacher, self-assessing, but also being assessed by our peers, which, as we all know, when we do webinars online or when we deliver presentations at conferences, sometimes it's actually more daunting doing something in front of our peers or being assessed by our peers, right, than it is being in front of a classroom, okay, with students. So those are kind of like the two key areas I would identify as ways of moving forward. And before I move on to I'm going to close my slides and open the webinar to discussion. But I also wanted to say something, which is a comment that I had recently from a student, from a colleague, saying, "Oh yeah, but I mean, that's all very nice, your self-assessment and everything, but that's not. It doesn't really work. It works because you have adult students, you have master's level students, you have higher level students. It wouldn't work at secondary level, or it wouldn't work with younger students or weaker level students." And personally, I disagree with that. But maybe in the discussion, that's something that if you, in your professional experience, you've already done this with younger students or with weaker levels, it could be interesting for you to share that with us. So I'm going to stop my slides. I'm going to come back on screen and open to any questions, comments. In the chat, right? Okay, so I see that we have a comment about the peer assessment by peers, that it's difficult emotionally. Yep, I think that it's also true for, certainly in my experience, it's also true for French students. Again, if I remind you of my context, we have French students who they're very, they spent a couple of very difficult years of training to get into this very selective school. And so it's true that often they're more interested in knowing, ironically, they're more interested in knowing what they're not doing well than what they're doing well. And so perhaps if it comes from the teacher, that's one thing, but coming from a peer, maybe it would be more difficult or not. I'm going to give it a try. So next academic year, I'm going to suggest working on peer feedback and co-constructing the rubric. But I think that definitely, yes, the emotional, the psychology for language teachers, I think that we have to take that on board. And also maybe some intercultural perspectives. In our school, we have a mix of nationalities, being aware that our expectations are not necessarily the same. Our experience is not necessarily the same, depending on the past experience that our students have had. Yeah, great. Okay. I don't know if anyone else in the who's been participating in the webinar, if you've already tried peer assessment, or what you feel about involving having peer assessment, or at lower levels, for example, or younger students. I don't know if anyone teaches younger students in the group, if you've tried it with teenagers, for example.
I see no replies from
Yep.
At this moment, I would like to, because I was muted throughout the whole webinar, but right now, I think it would be more, since there are not too many of us, it would be more convenient for all of us to express our ideas just by talking, not writing in the chat box, because writing in the chat box is always slightly more time consuming. So if anybody has anything to say, I would like to encourage you to say it directly. Yes, you can visualize yourselves if you feel like it. If you don't feel like being seen by the rest of the participants, you can just say it while staying in hiding. So do we have any comments? There is. Daniela, go ahead.
Hello, hello, how are you doing? Thank you so much for the space, and also thank you so much for the information. I just want to mention that, well, this kind of process, I did the comments about like saying that when we refer to assessment, we shouldn't, or we have to stop thinking that it is only related to exams or this kind of stuff. Since it's a process, then we might start at least to have a starting point in which the student can be conscious about where is he or she, yes, then during the process, where are they going, and well, at the end of the process, where did they get, yes. So this is something that really caught my attention, and I would like to know, in terms of the first grid that you created, and then in terms of the second grid, yeah, you said that it is not perfect. I agree with that. Every time we are on constant, changes. But what made you to consider to reflect the things that you changed? Because when I saw the first grid, I liked it. In fact, I would really like to try some of the points, but I know that maybe you see that you have like a mix there, subject things and object things. But I mean, you finally apply the second one, or you still use both?
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you for both your comments in the Woo Club and the chat, and also for your for your discussion. Great question. So actually, I'm still using both. My first example wasn't perfect, but the first example does allow me to assess the engagement, okay, and which the second example doesn't. So the second example, I used it as part of an assessment process at the end of the semester for the simulation. But the first, my first example is still being used, and I would honestly, when I'm thinking about my next academic year and moving to the peer assessment, I would be basing the peer assessment on the first grid, like basically, actually. No, yeah.
Okay,
I'm happy you said that you like. I'm happy you said that you liked it, like because
yeah. I mean, the first one, it's because sometimes I've been considering, okay, how would I grade the way how my students just get into class, and the idea of having, for example, okay, if the 100% of the attendance is the 5, and then once or twice that you were late, each one has like a level, so that's why I really like it, because I wasn't clear like how should I measure that. So yes. And only one last question or one last comment. You already said it. It is not easy. And for example, this is, or those are maybe some of the disadvantages. When I say disadvantages, is because we're teachers. We have like a lot of stuff to do. And I mean, in a previous course that I had like 35 students, and I was trying to make feedback for each one of my students. And it was awful. It was tiring. I was exhausted. And I even, I mean, sometimes feedback, it's important when students get it at the same moment of their performance, or at least a little bit later. But with that kind of a lot of students, is going to be difficult, and the feedback is going to be, I'm not saying useful, it depends on the students, but if I take my activity or my task today, and I receive my feedback in a month, it is not gonna be like the same, like if they receive it the same day or even tomorrow. So how can we deal with that? I'm struggling with that because I have like a large kind of groups. And yeah, I know this is difficult, but is there any way that we can fight even to automatize those process? But I'm not sure about automatizing this process because it's something that I need to convey or even to negotiate with my student. If she or he gives himself a grade and I give another one, then we need to agree which one is the suitable one. So I don't know if I made myself understood. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise really valid points. We are teachers. We're all very busy. We also have personal lives. I mean, even if teachers, we tend to the divide between personal life and our professional life is often quite fuzzy. I think that was why I thought about integrating peer feedback to kind of take so that it would actually, if we have a bigger group, that instead of having the teacher going in with the grade already done, that in fact it would be like kind of a process and that the students would do it in small groups, for example. I thought that could be one way of doing it. I also liked your idea of like making it automatic, because we can't make it automatic, right? I mean, otherwise, ChatGPT would be, if we have, ChatGPT for assessment, great. But I think that we could potentially, if it's a process and if it's over a semester and we have a bigger group, then maybe like we could have a grid which would correspond to a bit like not a learner journal, but it could be like some kind of assessment over the semester, and saying, yeah, so by the end of, by the end of week 4, we'll have worked on the first section, you'll have self-assessed, I'll have assessed, and we'll compare. In the second part of the course, we're going to focus on another 2. And then at the end of the semester, we can always have a discussion overall, but maybe breaking it down into smaller categories could also be one way of doing it. And maybe that could even be done online. If you have like a Moodle or some kind of platform, a learner management platform, where you could actually have the grid already online and the students just have to tick, for example, and you too, right? But I agree with you. I think that what I really liked about this approach was personalizing the feedback, showing the students, well, yeah, like you were in my class and I know you, I noticed you, I recognize the work that you've done, and I really appreciated that you were, always present, that you were never late, and I want to give you credit for that, and I also want you to see that I want you to know that you deserve a 5 also, right? But I hear your point, and to be honest, I actually delivered a session a few weeks ago to science teachers, so not language teachers, but science teachers, presenting what I'd done, and the first thing they said was, oh, no, we have I have a lecture theater with over 100 students, there's no way, I can't do it, it doesn't fit what I do, and of course, I mean, I can accept that. That's why I'm not a science teacher.
Yes, I got it.
I would like to
Thank you
say
so much.
Sinead, when you were replying to Daniela's question, you spoke a lot about the so-called positive feedback. I am the believer in the power of positive feedback. I've written about it, and I think that this is the most important element because it builds this feeling of success or a sense of achievement, as you wish. And, I'm an old teacher, so my memory fails me very often. So whenever my students present something or have some task, I have my notes in front of me, and when I'm fascinated by something that they really did well, I make notes about it. The traditional way notes. And I have those notes from all the consecutive academic years at my university, so that if I have a group of students who have business English with me, for example, for 2 years, they can look at every moment, they can look at the notes from the previous year, and then they see how much they have developed. Yes, so they have this positive reinforcement, and for me as a teacher, it's a good thing to do, because I don't lose some of the precious things that I discovered along the way because then comes the next student. Yes, Daniela knows very well about it. With many students, you have, you know, and then there is another one. This one is also fascinating, but I have forgotten about the previous one. Yes, so traditionally made notes, because when students undertake some kind of activity, teacher cannot stay idle. Yes, so so I have to keep myself busy, so I make notes. Yes, and when I give feedback to my students, I always start with the positive feedback. Yes, and then the negative feedback for me are areas of improvement, not what you did wrong, but there are some areas of improvement, so maybe that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe
you
just
so
a comment is that when I was developing the first grid, one of my colleagues, she said, yeah, but you know, for it's easy, like for me, it's not a problem knowing who participated or whatever in class, because every time my students, like, you know, they speak in class, I basically, like, in my I have a log and I put like a dash, you know, or like a dot, and I thought, wow, that's great. I mean, I personally, I wouldn't be, I'm not disciplined enough to do it like systematically. But she said that for her that worked really well, you know. And so at the end of the semester, she has, like, you know, the number of dashes, which then kind of correspond to a grade, right? I'm just aware, I see there's like one other question in the chat, because I know that it's already, time goes very fast. And it was a question from Arpita about ensuring the self-assessment in a large classroom. And I think that this was what we were talking about. This would be why it could be useful to have like a peer assessment, you know, as opposed to only self-assessment, where we could break down the students into smaller groups. They could be, you know, assessed by their peers instead of the teacher, and then they could self-assess. So it would be really decomposing into smaller groups, so that students, you know, they still have the opportunity to consider, to reflect on what they've done, to get some feedback. But it's not only teacher student, but it's more student, like student, like, for example. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think, I'm not sure if there are any other questions. I think we're already out of time. 6. Yeah.
But do you have, so that our participants feel really taken proper care of? So
Yes.
does anybody have any questions, comments, anything that you would like to share with Sinead? No other questions and comments?
Maybe I could just say that, yeah, if anyone is interested in, I mean, I'm happy to share this, to share my grids. If anyone is interested in, you know, in being inspired or developing their own grids, I'm happy to share those with you. It's not a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your precious time with
You're
us.
welcome. Thank you
In the
for